Hey, what's going on? This is the Body Punch Podcast, and my name is Naz. Let's talk about GSP versus Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, the reason why I bring up the topic of Khabib Nurmagomedov and GSP is because of a podcast that George St-Pierre did with Michael Bisping. Now, there was a myriad of topics that went through that podcast. Very interesting. I'd recommend listening to that podcast because it answers a lot of questions. I thought one of the interesting things that they talked about was the state of Canadian MMA. Now, I hold that dear to my heart, and I think it's a very important topic to discuss. So I'd recommend listening to that podcast. GSP gives a really good inside look at what's going on in the Canadian MMA scene. The GOAT of Canada. And in my opinion, I think the GOAT of the UFC gives his thoughts. And it's a lot more thorough and it's a lot more in-depth because he's in that scene of Canadian MMA. So I'd really recommend listening to that podcast and taking some notes about it. I found it very interesting, and Michael Bisping is a very good host, and he brings a really interesting perspective because on top of that, he also fought the guy for the belt. It was very rough back and forth arguments that they had. I remember it was at the Hockey Hall of Fame in Canada, in Toronto. And they were going back and forth. And it was just, it was really interesting to see the way George St-Pierre handled that situation. Now they seem like they're really good friends and they're able to talk to each other. But at the time, what GSP did was incredible. To come back from retirement against a guy that most will admit got the belt in a weird circumstance. I mean, he did knock out Luke Rockhold, but to come back and submit Michael Bisping, who at the time was very active, to come back, win the belt, and give it up. I think it shows how important this guy is, George St-Pierre, and how special he was. Now, let's talk about him and Khabib Nurmagomedov. Obviously, the fight is not announced. They haven't talked about it. In terms of the UFC, hasn't talked about it. But it seems like Khabib Nurmagomedov really wants this fight. It seems like George St-Pierre really wants this fight. There's been a bunch of reports saying that Khabib Nurmagomedov's father was really interested in making the last fight on Khabib Nurmagomedov's career to be George St-Pierre. A lot of reports are coming out saying that. Now, Khabib Nurmagomedov's father believed that George St-Pierre was the GOAT, in many people's opinion. And that's why he wanted his son to face him, to show the world what he's capable of. Now, I think it would be a really fun fight. George St-Pierre came out in the interview and said that the walking around weight that Khabib Nurmagomedov and George St-Pierre have must be very similar. Obviously, he doesn't know for a fact. He hasn't gone and measured him or put him on a scale or anything like that while he's out of camp. But he believes that Khabib Nurmagomedov and himself walk around at the same weight. He says he walks around 180 something. And he believes that Khabib walks around at that weight as well. And because of that weight, George St-Pierre put out a lot of stipulations on how the fight could occur. Now, he mentioned that the UFC has to ask him. He's not going to ask the UFC to make that fight. He believes if he goes to the UFC and asks for that fight, then he's going to get lowballed, which is obvious. When you ask for something and the UFC figures out, okay, this guy's interested in this fight and he's going out of his way to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov, then we don't have to pay him as much. Or there might be some other deal when it comes to the pay-per-view. That's why George St-Pierre believes that he should be the one asked about Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now, he's interested as well. Don't take this as GSP saying that he doesn't want to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. That's not what he's saying. He actually mentioned in the podcast that he's looking for the biggest test. And the biggest test, in his opinion, that is achievable, meaning he could make the weight or they could be in similar weight classes, is Khabib Nurmagomedov. He believes that the mixture of his MMA skills is what's going to win him the fight. He also believes, and a lot of people say this, is that you got to keep this guy on your feet. You got to keep this standing. You got to hit him with strikes. You got to figure out to negate the takedown. I believe that while Khabib Nurmagomedov while he's in his prime, because there's going to be some point in every fighter's career where they can't do the things that they could in their prime. But at this point in his life, I believe that you got to mix it up. The way that George St-Pierre is talking about in this podcast with Michael Bisping, the fact is that you got to mix it up. You got to present a takedown as well. You got to take the guy down. You got to show that you're the aggressor as well. You're willing to go to the ground with him. Now, with that triangle choke and with the other submissions that he's done, he's very well known for his rear naked chokes. We don't know the full extent of his jiu-jitsu game from the back. But since this guy's so dominant in any other fashion, like in all the other facets of mixed martial arts, because of his wrestling, because he focuses on it so much, why wouldn't you take the chance on an unknown? The unknown being his back game. We haven't seen Khabib Nurmagomedov being taken down. What happens in that situation? And Luke Thomas brought this up in his conversation with Paul Felder. He said that the 155-pound division is very interesting, and I never thought of it like this, but it's an interesting point to bring up. You face all of these amazing strikers: Justin Gaethje, Dustin Poirier, Conor McGregor, now Michael Chandler, Dan Hooker's in that conversation, Paul Felder's in that conversation. I mean, all of these amazing strikers. I would even put Tony up there for his unorthodox style. And you have to face all of these amazing strikers. And your gift, that UFC belt, is held by a guy with the best wrestling in the UFC. How amazing is that? Have you guys thought of the way that that division is stacked up? Very interesting. And a lot of people's game plans when facing Khabib Nurmagomedov has been to keep this guy on the feet, to keep this guy standing up, because they've seen a little bit of his stand-up game when he's faced adversary, people going at him and hitting him with clean shots. They've seen a little bit of that and they think, oh my God, like this is the way to beat this guy. But nobody tried to take him down. That's what GSP says he'll do best in, mixing it up. He talked about an interesting point here. He said that, you know, Michael Bisping said, what if we do a grappling match? Will that be enough to figure out who's the better one? Because in Michael Bisping's eyes and a lot of people's eyes, this will be won on the ground. So why not have a grappling match? GSP brought up the fact that he doesn't believe that his main strength is in one of his skills. He doesn't believe he's the best wrestler. He doesn't believe he's the best striker. He doesn't believe he's the best jiu-jitsu player. He believes him mixing it up, it's what makes him the best. And that's totally true. The way the guy mixes it up, and even in defeating Michael Bisping, the way that he got him to the ground, the way that he uses in and out movement, his karate style, the kind of senses that he got from karate, he uses it to take people down. He brought up Lyoto Machida, for example. Lyoto Machida uses his karate movement for his striking. GSP talked about how he adapted that movement and that in and out positioning that he has for his wrestling. And I think that's a very important point to make. And that's why he believes that a grappling match would not be the way to figure out who's the better one. Because he believes, and I believe myself, that he is best in mixing it up. And that's what Khabib Nurmagomedov needs to see next. I think someone needs to either take him down, be the aggressor, not just strike with him, but to use their offensive wrestling. I think that's why I was so high on Justin Gaethje, even though we haven't seen him use his wrestling all that much to take people down. But I thought that in that game plan that they had, I was watching the behind the scenes and the amount of wrestling that he was doing with his coach, and I thought that he was really going to go for a takedown. I thought he was going to be the offensive one. But they went for the other game plan, which was to kick the legs. Khabib saying that was the hardest leg kick that he's ever felt. Obviously, Justin Gaethje is one of the best leg kickers in the game. The way that he's able to generate the power that he does in that small of a space is amazing. He's in close quarters with you, really tight. And the hip flexibility that he has to generate that power is, you know, like I said, amazing. That's what he went in using. But what if he used the wrestling? Now, another interesting thing that GSP talked about in this interview with Michael Bisping is GSP never liked the drama involved with the sport of mixed martial arts. What he means by that, there's a bunch of stuff that goes on. There's money issues. There's people trying to sign you for sponsorships. There's people trying to put you on commercials and all this kind of stuff. GSP just wanted to come in there and fight and train and use the money, the notoriety, all that kind of stuff that he gets from the UFC in his normal everyday life. If you look at GSP now, he does a couple acting things, he trains, and that's basically it. That's the life that he enjoys. And he believes that on top of not being lowballed by the UFC, that's another reason why he's not begging for this fight with Khabib. It will give him the money, it will give him everything, but it will bring back all of that notoriety, the fame, the things that will cause issues maybe. He doesn't want any of that drama. Now, obviously, I think he does want to fight the guy. But the way that he's talking about it, there's a lot of things that need to be involved. He's talked about the weight that we talked about at the beginning of the podcast. But he says that the only way he'll do it is if they're able to weigh them the day before, like always, but then also count the body fat percentage, all this kind of stuff. And he also brought up ONE FC and the way that they're doing it. I don't know if I believe the ONE FC model as much. People have brought it up so many times. Eddie Alvarez and DJ are just about to fight, and they're bringing up the way that ONE FC kind of measures their athletes. And that will have to, if they want to still be involved with the UFC, if George St-Pierre and Khabib want to do this under the UFC banner, which they have to, they're both contracted UFC fighters. I don't know about George. He might be on the kind of a shorter contract. But if they still want to do it under the UFC, then they're going to have to do it with the UFC's rules and with the commission that they're under. So I just think that there's a lot of factors that have to go into this fight before it can even be signed. But like Khabib Nurmagomedov's coach, Javier Mendez, mentioned in an interview, that he himself believes that George St-Pierre is next. He hasn't talked to Khabib about it, but he really wants to fight. And if Khabib was to ask him who he should fight next, Jav would say GSP or retire. Now, there's another factor that goes into it, and Javier Mendez mentioned this as well, is that will Khabib Nurmagomedov's mother allow him to do this? Now, I can already hear it. Oh my God, why are you bringing this up? This is not that big of a deal. He can just ask her and it'll be okay. The money will solve everything. But this is a big deal for this kind of guy. For a guy that sticks to what he says. For him to go and ask his mother after, it's just going to be tough for him. And it's going to be a tough decision that they're going to have to make together. Because on one hand, this was Khabib's father's dream, essentially, was to win all of these fights and fight the best fighter, in his opinion, who is George St-Pierre. And then on the other hand, do you really want to go into this fight without him, without that head coach? I know Javier Mendez is a major part, but Khabib's father brings a lot to the table as well. He still fought Justin Gaethje and he did what he had to do, but now you're fighting a guy that has told everybody that he's going to mix it up and bring something different to the table. How are you going to game plan for that? So I thought this was a very interesting topic to talk about. I mean, George St-Pierre is one of my favorite fighters, so I always love talking about him. Khabib Nurmagomedov is one of my favorite fighters, and when you can combine them together, that makes a very good podcast, in my opinion, for me to talk about it and to research about. And to watch that Michael Bisping interview with George St-Pierre and him going back and forth, and even Farhad Sahabi saying that he wants GSP to fight Khabib Nurmagomedov. This adds a lot to this fire. This fight could happen. But will we see a diminished George St-Pierre if this takes too long? That's what I hope doesn't happen. George still looks like he's in phenomenal shape. But there's a lot of fighters that look like they're in great shape and then get in there, but they're not the same as who they once were. So I hope this fight, if it does happen, happens soon. And it'll be amazing to see George St-Pierre and Khabib back in the octagon. How special would that be? That'd be amazing. That'd be special. That would be, I mean, that fight alone would just be the blockbuster event for 2021. I mean, Conor McGregor is going to come back, and all these 2021 in general, the whole 2021 is looking to be one of the best years for the UFC. So I love covering this stuff. I love talking about it. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to me talk about George St-Pierre and Khabib Nurmagomedov. I really appreciate it. If you guys could like, subscribe, and hit the bell notification on YouTube, that'd be great. And if you guys could give all the 5 stars and listen to the podcast on the different podcast networks, that'd be really appreciated as well. This has been the Body Punch Podcast. My name is Naz. Bye.